Hi, thanks for joining me. I'm one of the P6 trainers and implementation specialists for TEPCO, located in Baytown, Texas. And today we're going to talk about time periods in P6. When we add activities in P6, usually we enter the durations against those activities in days. For those of you that work in downstream or upstream turnaround environments in the oil and gas industry, typically those are scheduled in hours. But most projects out there are scheduled in days. As schedulers, we need to have a clear understanding of what a day is. Is it 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, possibly 9? It could be 24. It really depends on what your environment considers to be a day. The first thing we need to clearly understand is under the admin menu and then admin preferences, and there is a tab called time periods. We need to have a clear understanding of what we have set up in P6 for these 4 time periods here, specifically the hours per day. Currently, the default setting is 8 hours per day. For a week, it's 40. For a month, it's 172. And for a year, it's 2,000. There is this option here with a checkbox that says use assigned calendar to specify the number of work hours for each time period. I'm going to leave that turned off right now, and I will come back to that later and explain what that is. Also, because I'm going to be showing you some examples, I just want to be clear about the time period abbreviations down here: N for minutes, H for hours, D for days, and so on. Specifically days, because I'm going to show some examples where I put in the D after I enter in a number for the number of days. So if I put in 3D inside my original duration field, that means 3 days. And you're going to see how Primavera will convert that into hours automatically. I also need to point out my user preferences, so I'm going to go to Edit User Preferences. And the reason I want to point this out is because I am going to make some changes to this within this video. Currently I have my durations format set to day, and I have my duration label turned on. I am going to turn on my decimals. This will help clarify some things when we go and enter things in days and hours against an activity. My units format can stay as hours, and I'm not going to turn the decimals on for that at this point. For my first example here, I have an activity put in with a duration of 5 days. And I also have a resource assigned to it, a single resource. So the 5 days at 8 hours per day calculates as 40 total labor units. I'm going to change my duration to 1 day. And you'll see that the budgeted labor units recalculates based on 8 hours a day. Now I'm going to go to Edit User Preferences, and I'm going to change my duration format under the Time Units tab to hour. Now you can see that my duration has converted into hours. 1 day equals 8 hours per day. And what I want to point out here is I'm going to type in 2D, because P6 will take the abbreviation that we have set up in the admin preferences, and it will automatically convert it to hours. So when I hit enter right now, it will take the 2 days and convert it into hours because my user preferences are set to view in hours. So by putting in 2D, it calculates based on the admin settings for time periods of 8 hours per day, it calculates as 16 hours. The same concept applies if I enter the duration in as weeks. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to enter 3W. And watch how the hours calculate based on entering 3 weeks. So now we have 120 hours. So again, P6 took the 3 weeks, and by using 40 hours a week in the admin preferences, it converted it into 120 hours. Now I'm going to show you what happens if we change the admin preferences for the time periods. I'm back to my previous example where we had 16 hours, or 8 hours per day equals 1 day. So this would be the equivalent of 2 days. And if I change my user preferences, you will see that. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is reflecting 2 days. I'm going to change my user preferences back to hour. And now I'm going to go to the admin preferences, and I'm going to change what the hours per day are. I'm going to change that to 10, and I'll go ahead and change the hours per week to 50. Now watch what happens to the original duration. Nothing changes. This is good. This means that P6 is retaining what our original duration for the hours are, even though we had changed the time periods in the admin preferences. Now I'm going to go to Edit User Preferences, and I'm going to change my duration format back to day. Now watch what happens to the original duration field. It has actually reconverted to a different number because now a day equals 10 hours and our activity was set to 16 hours for duration. Based on our changes to the admin preferences time periods tab, it has now reconverted that into being 1.6 days rather than being 2 days. What's important to understand here is that P6 always stores durations in hours, and then it uses the time periods that are set up under admin preferences to convert them into days or weeks or months based on what you set your user preferences durations format to. If a P6 scheduler is entering durations in days, they need to have a clear understanding that P6 is actually storing those durations in an hourly format behind the scenes. And it's storing those durations based on, in this situation anyway, what the admin preferences time periods are. What we as schedulers don't want to do is make an assumption that a day equals something like 8 hours. For example, if I come in here and change this original duration to 3 days, and I'm assuming 8 hours a day, the budgeted units should really be 24 hours. But because our admin preferences time periods are set up for 10 hours a day, it has now calculated 30 labor units. Now let's look at another option under admin preferences time periods. So I'm going to go to admin preferences, back to time periods, and I'm going to turn this option on to use assigned calendar to specify the number of work hours for each time period. What this does is it tells P6, don't look at these admin preferences anymore. It tells P6 to look at the time periods associated with a specific calendar. I'm going to go create a new calendar and I will show you the time periods associated with that calendar. So I'm going to go to Enterprise and Calendars. And I'm going to go ahead and click Add and add a new one. I will derive it from the standard 5-day work week. And I'm going to call this one a 410 calendar. Now I'm going to modify it. And in the modify window, I'm going to keep this pretty simple, but I am going to click the work week button and I'm going to set it up to be Monday through Thursday, 10 hours a day. That means Friday will be 0 hours. Click OK. But now there's this button called time periods. We need to click on this. And notice how by default the time periods hours per day is set to 8. This is not correct for us because we want a 410 calendar, so a day equals 10 hours. Now the hours per week would be correct because it's 40 hours per week, and then hours per month or hours per year could probably remain the same. I'll click OK and OK. For what I'm about to show you, I'm going to go change my user preferences to show the duration by hours again. And you'll notice I have an 8-hour activity here, duration of 8 hours, and there's one resource assigned, so that would be 8 labor units. And this one is currently set to this standard 5-day work week calendar. That particular calendar, its time periods are set to 8 hours per day. Now I'm going to change this calendar to the new 410 calendar that we created. Notice how the original duration is still 8 hours, which is good. We wouldn't want a simple calendar change to affect that. But if I come up here to edit user preferences and I change my duration format to day again, notice how my duration now is 0.8 of a day rather than 1 day. And if I change this calendar back to the standard 5-day work week, which has 8 hours per day per time period, notice how the original duration changes to calculate as 1 full day. Knowing this, P6 schedulers need to have a clear understanding of what calendar they're using when they're entering durations on the activities. Given this is a standard 5-day work week calendar and its time periods are set up for 8 hours per day, I should know prior to entering the duration how my hours are going to calculate. So if I enter 3 days of duration here, I should have in the back of my head already an understanding that that particular calendar is going to calculate it as 8 hours per day. So if I hit 3 here, it should be 8 hours per day, and that equals 24. If I change this calendar to the 410, again, you'll see the duration change because P6 has now taken the 24-hour duration that was stored behind the scenes and it has converted it based on the time period for the new calendar. Another thing to be aware of is if I go to Edit User Preferences, and this is something that gets overlooked a lot, I'm going to turn my decimals off. Notice how it says 2 days there. Let's go back to 1 day. And 1 times 10 on the 410 calendar equals 10 labor units. Now I'm going to make this change back to the standard 5-day work week. Notice how my original duration is still showing as 1. This is because I have turned my decimals off. I actually don't know right now that it has changed the duration in the day format because I don't have my decimals showing. So I'm going to go back to Edit User Preferences and I will turn my decimals back on, and now you will see the change. So when you're working in this environment, it's probably a good idea to have your decimals turned on. A lot of people don't like to turn them on because it uses up more space in the column. If you don't have them turned on, you might be overlooking something, or you might be making a mistake that you're not aware of, and you simply see that the duration is rounding up to 1 or 2 or 5, when behind the scenes, based on the hours that have been stored against those durations, it may actually be in a fraction or a decimal. For a final example, I'm going to give you a bit more of an extreme view of 2 activities. These 2 activities are both the same duration long when it comes to calendar days, so they're about 3 months, starting both on October 1st and each ending October 31st. However, activity A has a 7/24 calendar, so the original duration is reading 2194. Activity B has a 410 calendar, and the duration is reading 530 hours. Also during this example, I'm going to be going to Edit User Preferences, and I'm going to toggle my duration format through all of the different duration types. So I'm going to do hours, days, weeks, months, and years so that you can see the difference between the 2 activities when I do change the duration format. Before I get started, I want to reiterate that both of these activities have the same start date of October 1st and they have the same finish date of December 31st. So they are both around 91 days long, or you could consider them 13 weeks long, 3 months long, or about a third of a year long, or 1 quarter long. To start off, I'm going to utilize the admin preferences time periods, and I am not going to use the assign calendar to specify the number of work hours for each time period. So this checkbox is going to be turned off, and we will not be looking at the time periods for each of the specific calendars. Given that, our hours per day are 8, hours per week are 40, hours per month are 172, and hours per year are 2,000. Now I'm going to change my user preferences duration format to days. Notice how activity B is showing 66 days and activity A is showing 274. We had mentioned that for calendar days, consecutive calendar days, that these activities are about 91 days long. So the 410 calendar at 40 hours a week or 4 days worth of work per week is calculating at 66 days. However, the 7/24 calendar could be misleading because it is not 274 days long. Now I'm going to go to Edit User Preferences and change to weeks. The same concept applies here. The activities are about 13 weeks long, so the weekly format for the 410 calendar is correct. However, The 7 by 24 is indicating that the activity is 54 weeks long, which would technically be more than a year. So that is not accurate as well. And I will follow through by going to show you the durations format of month. The 7 by 24 calendar is showing that it's 12 months long, even though we know that it is only 3 months long. The 410 calendar is calculating properly. And let's just take a look at year. You can see that the 7 by 24 is indicating that it's 1 year long, and that the 410 calendar is indicating that it's 0.27 of a year. I've set my duration format in my user preferences back to hour, and now I'm going to utilize the calendar time period. So I'm going to go to Admin Preferences, and I'm going to turn this checkbox on, which as defined previously will cause P6 to ignore these 4 fields, and now it will refer to the calendar time periods. Before I go through the different duration formats, I want to show you what I've set up for the calendar time periods for each calendar. So I'm going to go to Enterprise Calendars. I'm going to select the 410 and hit the Modify button and go to Time Periods. You can see that I've set up 10 hours a day since it is a 410 calendar. That's the equivalent of 40 hours a week, 172 hours a month, and 2,000 hours a year. I'm going to click OK. Now I'm going to show you the 7 by 24, which is going to be different, and here's the time periods for that. 24 hours per day, 168 hours in a week, 730 in a month, which is about an average, and 8,760 per year. Since we've set up different time periods for each calendar, each of these activities are going to be referencing different time periods when we do the conversion to days, weeks, months, and years. Now I'm going to go back to Edit User Preferences, and I'm going to step through each of the different duration formats again. First, we'll start with day. The 7 by 24 calendar is reading 91 days, which would be accurate for a 24-hour calendar because it is 91 consecutive days. The 410 calendar is reading a 53-day duration because we are only working 4 days out of each week. Back to Edit User Preferences, and we will show it by week now. They're both reading very similar here at about 13 weeks. They are off a little bit on the decimals, but they are converting correctly. The 7 by 24 calendar in general is 13 weeks long, but it's at 24 hours a day, whereas the 410 calendar in general is 13 weeks long as well, but only at 40 hours per week or 10 hours per day. And we'll go to month. These are both reading very similar as well at about 3 months. And if we go to Edit User Preferences and go to year, you can see that they're both reading at about a quarter of a year. This is a better way to display the durations if you're using multiple calendars. You want to keep this in mind as each calendar should have different time periods associated with it. This is very important if you're displaying duration in days, weeks, months, or years and it is not converting correctly. Let's summarize some of the key points discussed during this session. First, P6 always stores duration in hours. So if you enter your duration in days or weeks, it will convert those durations into hours behind the scenes based on the time periods that you have set up, either under admin preferences or if you are using the calendar time periods, it will do the conversion based on the calendar time periods. The storing of the duration hours is static, so the hours that are stored will not change if you go and change your time periods. But the way the durations are displayed can change. So if you are looking at it in days or weeks, those things can then alter based on how you have made the change to the time periods. The admin preferences for time periods defines the number of duration hours per day, week, month, and year. So if you are utilizing the admin preferences only and not using the calendar time periods, you want to make sure you have a clear understanding of what numbers are entered into those admin preferences for time periods. Is your organization considering 8 hours to be a day, or is it 10 hours to be a day? You need to have a clear understanding of what that is before you start entering durations in days, because it's going to take that number and it's going to convert the day entry into hours behind the scenes. When we're in the admin preferences, if you decide to activate the option to use assigned calendar to specify the number of work hours for each time period, the duration conversion comes from the calendar time periods now, not the admin preferences. So the admin preference numbers are overwritten. The durations are derived from the calendars. It's a good idea to show your duration decimals to make sure you're not making a mistake. I showed you an example where you could enter 1 day of duration based on 8 hours a day, but then if you change your time periods or you change a calendar to say a 410 calendar from a 5/8 calendar, it can change what your duration format looks like when you're viewing it in a daily format rather than an hourly format. And when utilizing time periods for calendars, changing an activity calendar can change how the durations are converted, which is basically what I just said. So if you are entering a duration against an activity, it's a good idea to know beforehand and probably set beforehand which calendar you're going to be using. So if you are using a 410, you may want to make sure that a 410 calendar is assigned to the activity prior to entering the durations. That way, if you enter 2 days for the duration, it's going to take on 10 hours per day over a 2-day period. I hope you found this TEPCO session on P6 time periods useful. If you would like more information on TEPCO services or on the TEPCO training programs, please go to www.tepco.us.